He staggered through the wilderness, armor shattered, face scarred, body trembling from wounds that refused to heal. Behind him lay the screams of comrades cut down by barbarian steel. Ahead, the horizon glowed with hope. The eternal city, Rome. Its walls rose like salvation itself. He had survived the unthinkable. He had beaten death. And yet, when he reached the gates, when he begged for entry, Rome did not open its arms. The city he bled for turned its back. He survived the barbarians, but could he survive the betrayal of Rome? Rome was an empire built on loyalty, discipline, and sacrifice. Every soldier swore an oath, not just to fight, but to die for the eternal city. For centuries, that oath had been honored in blood, carved into the soil of countless battlefields. Yet loyalty is a fragile bond, and Rome, for all its grandeur, was often colder than the steel its legions carried. This story is not of conquest or glory. It is not of emperors crowned in gold or triumphal marches cheered by thousands. It is the story of one man, wounded, loyal, and desperate, who came home from hell only to find that home no longer recognized him. The gates of Rome stood tall, but to him, they were walls of betrayal. His survival against the barbarians was extraordinary, but his rejection at the hands of his own people reveals the darker truth of Rome's survival. The barbarian onslaught. The northern frontier had always been dangerous, but that year it burned with an unholy fire. The barbarians did not come in scattered bands. They came as a tide, furious, relentless, and merciless. The soldier and his cohort had been stationed along the river, a thin line meant to hold back a flood. But when the forest erupted with war cries and the clash of iron, Rome's discipline shattered against sheer chaos. He remembered the faces of his comrades as the first arrows struck. Men he had trained with for years, laughing in camp, sharing bread, speaking of their families, suddenly fell silent in death. The barbarians surged from the tree line, like shadows turned to flesh. Tall, broad, painted in blood and ash, they fought with a fury that mocked Roman formations. The shield wall broke. Centurions shouted until their throats were cut. Standards fell into the mud. The soldier fought, not for glory, but for survival. His sword arm grew heavy. His shield splintered beneath the weight of axe and spear. Every strike was answered by another. Every retreat met by pursuit. Around him, brothers fell, one after another, their cries drowned in the roar of an enemy that seemed endless. The earth itself seemed to drink their blood. At some point, he stopped fighting to win. He fought only to escape, crawling through bodies, rolling beneath smoke, running into the forest, where the shadows swallowed everything. Each breath was a gamble. Each heartbeat felt like it would be his last. By nightfall, the legion was gone, wiped out, scattered into the soil they had sworn to protect. He alone remained. But survival was not victory. It was torment. Every scream echoed in his head. Every fallen face a ghost that walked beside him. He had lived when others had not. He was marked, not as a hero, but as a man cursed with memory. When the battle ended, he was not triumphant. He was broken, bleeding, starving, and alone in the wilderness. And yet, in the distance, one thought kept him moving. Rome, the city of stone and glory, the mother of legions. If he could reach her gates, if he could lay his weary body before her walls, he would be safe. At least, that is what he believed. The journey back to Rome, when the screams faded and the forest grew quiet, he found himself surrounded by silence more terrifying than battle. The battlefield was no longer a place of warriors. It was a graveyard. Broken spears jutted from the ground like skeletal fingers. Shields lay abandoned, cracked and smeared with blood. Ravens circled above, feasting on flesh that had once been friends. He did not linger. To stay was to die. His wounds burned with every step. His body cried for rest, but rest meant death. So he staggered forward deeper into the wilderness. Days blurred into nights, nights into shadows filled with the whispers of the dead. Sometimes he thought he heard his comrades calling him, urging him to stop, to surrender. But he pressed on, clutching the memory of Rome like a dying man clutching a flame against the wind. Hunger clawed at his belly. The rations he had carried were gone. Lost in the chaos of flight, he learned to chew on bitter roots, to drink from muddy streams, to keep moving even when his legs trembled beneath him. The barbarians hunted deserters and survivors alike. He could not risk being found. Every snapped twig in the distance, every howl of wolves in the night sent his heart racing. The world had turned hostile, and yet along the broken roads, he found signs of others. Charred villages reduced to ash, women and children fleeing south, clutching what little they had left. Some looked at him with pity, others with fear, as though his survival itself was unnatural, as though he carried the curse of the fallen. None offered food. None offered shelter. In Rome's frontier lands, mercy was a luxury long forgotten. He wrapped himself in rags torn from the dead, hiding the crimson stains that refused to wash away. He pushed through swollen rivers, through forests where light never reached the ground. Each mile was paid with pain. Each breath was a negotiation with death. At times, the thought of laying down his sword and closing his eyes forever tempted him. But then he would see it in his mind. The walls of Rome rising, the gates opening, the promise of safety, food, and rest. The dream of returning home was the only shield left to him. And so, after weeks of wandering through shadow and hunger, he finally saw it. The glimmer of distant walls. Rome, eternal, standing proud above the horizon. His heart surged with hope. The nightmare was the gates of Rome. At last, after weeks of crawling through hunger, pain, and silence, he reached the outskirts of the eternal city. The sun was setting, and its fading light caught the towers of Rome's mighty walls, painting them in gold and fire. To any Roman, those walls were more than stone. They were salvation, the promise that no barbarian horde could ever breach the heart of the empire. For the soldier, those gates were more than salvation. They were home. He dragged his broken body across the final stretch of road, each step echoing with memories of comrades who never lived to see this sight. His lips cracked into a smile. Rome would not abandon her son. He reached the Porta Salaria, one of the northern gates. Guards stood above, their helmets gleaming in the dying sun. He raised his hand, cried out with a voice hoarse from thirst, "Open! I am a soldier of Rome. I have returned. For a moment, silence. Then, the sound of movement above. Shadows leaned over the battlements, studying him. He thought they would cheer, rush to open the doors, welcome him inside. Instead, the first voice that called down was cold. Stay where you are. Confusion gripped him. He tried again, louder this time. I fought on the frontier. I survived the barbarian slaughter. My brothers are dead, but I live. Open the gates. The guards did not move. They exchanged wary glances, muttered among themselves. Finally, another voice replied, You may not enter. Turn back. The words cut deeper than any sword. He fell to his knees, disbelief shaking through his bones. Turn back? He rasped. I bled for Rome. I gave my life to the eagle, to the oath. Open the gates. But the guards remained firm. To them, he was not a hero. He was a risk. A man who had survived the barbarians carried more than scars. He carried suspicion. Had he been captured and released as a spy? Did he carry plague from the camps? Was he truly loyal or broken in ways they could not see? Rome did not gamble with shadows. Rome did not gamble with mercy. He slammed his fists into the earth, tears mixing with dust. Above, the guards stood impassive, their silhouettes black against the flaming sky. Behind those walls, life continued. Children laughed, markets bustled, priests chanted their hymns. The city he had bled for was alive, but it was no longer his. Night fell. The gates never opened. He pressed his back to the cold stone, listening to the muffled hum of the city he could not touch. Hunger gnawed at him, wounds festered, and hope withered into rage. He had survived the barbarians, but here, at the threshold of Rome, he faced something worse: the betrayal of his own people. Why Rome closed its gates? To the man outside the walls, the rejection felt like madness. But to those inside, it was reason. Cold, merciless reason. Rome did not survive for centuries by opening its gates to uncertainty. It survived by calculation, by choosing survival of the many over mercy for the few. First came the fear of disease. Armies that fought in the wilderness often returned carrying more than scars. Dysentery, plague, fevers unknown to the city. These invisible enemies could destroy legions faster than barbarian swords. A lone survivor, ragged and trembling, was seen not as a warrior returned, but as a potential carrier of death. To open the gates to him was to risk opening them to pestilence. Then came suspicion. In times of war, Rome trusted no one, not even its own. Stories of deserters who sold secrets to the enemy were whispered in every tavern. Some men had even been captured, tortured, and sent back as spies. The lone survivor of a massacre was not greeted as a miracle. He was branded as a question. How had he lived when hundreds had not? What bargain had been made in the shadows of the forest? His survival was not seen as valor. It was seen as betrayal waiting to bloom. And above all stood politics. In the marble halls of power, emperors and senators feared weakness more than bloodshed. To admit survivors, to show mercy, was to risk appearing soft in the eyes of the people. The city needed the illusion of invincibility, the mask of strength. So the gates stayed closed. Rome remained untouched. Rome remained eternal. And the soldier remained outside, sacrificed not to the barbarians, but to the paranoia of the empire he had sworn to defend. This was Rome's genius and its cruelty. The empire had mastered the art of survival, but at a cost. It demanded loyalty from its sons, yet offered no guarantee of loyalty in return. For every triumph celebrated in the Forum, there were nameless men who rotted outside its walls. Rome endured because it was ruthless, and in that ruthlessness, it revealed its darkest truth. The empire was never built to save men. It was built to save itself. Legacy of betrayal. No chronicler wrote his name. No triumphal arch carried his likeness. To Rome, he was just another shadow, an inconvenient reminder that loyalty did not always return as reward. Some said he died outside the gates, slumped against the walls he once vowed to defend. His last breath stolen not by barbarian steel, but by Roman indifference. Others whispered that he wandered south, nameless among refugees, a ghost wrapped in rags, warning any who would listen that Rome's greatest enemy was not beyond its borders, but within its heart. Yet his story endured, not in marble or scrolls, but in whispers around campfires, in the eyes of soldiers marching to the next frontier. They knew what he had faced. They knew that survival was no guarantee of sanctuary. His fate became a silent lesson. Rome demanded sacrifice, but gave nothing back. Rome asked for blood, but offered no embrace. And in that betrayal lay the true cost of empire. The city that claimed to be eternal was built not just on victories and monuments, but on the bones of men it abandoned. Every stone of its walls was heavy with unspoken names. Every triumph carried the shadow of the forgotten. He survived the barbarians, but Rome, cold, unyielding Rome, chose to let him vanish. His body may have perished in silence, but his story remained, echoing through centuries as a warning. Even the greatest empire can devour its own sons. In the end, his story is more than a tragedy. It is a mirror. Rome's greatness was built on discipline, conquest, and fear, but also on betrayal of those who served it most faithfully. The man who crawled home from the jaws of death found that the gates of salvation were gates of exile. He survived the barbarians, but he could not survive Rome itself. And now, centuries later, his silence still asks us a question. In the struggle between loyalty and survival, what truly defines an empire? The strength of its walls, or the way it treats its own sons?